I was diagnosed with a chemical imbalance, manic depression.
They diagnosed me with having ADD.
He told me I had conduct disorder.
ADHD.
Mild depression.
Major depression.
Manic depressive.
Borderline personality disorder. Compulsive
Social
disorder.
anxiety.
Depression and schizophrenia.
Depression.
Sleep disorder. Identity problem disorder.
But all of these so-called diseases are just made up. They're just fabricated. They're fictions of psychiatry imagination.
What would psychiatrists do without their labels? They couldn't pretend to be real doctors anymore, you know? Neither could psychologists, you know? Diagnosing, what a godlike thing to do. Making diagnoses, and here's your treatment, a pill. Because so far they're not proving that any so-called mental illnesses exist. These are labels, and that's all they are.
But without proof, you can't have credibility. So psychiatrists manufacture their own.
It's based on a grab bag of checklists for disorders that are published in a book called the DSM, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. There are no statistics in this book, by the way. That just makes it sound more scientific.
They create this cluster of disease, and they get together and they vote. Is this a disease? All in favor say aye.
The American Psychiatric Association is the publisher and owner and wealthy owner of DSM. They've made a great deal of money on DSM.
Since the first edition of the DSM, the number of mental disorders voted into psychiatry's diagnostic manual has grown to 374. And with each new disorder, psychiatrists create yet another way to defraud the public.
If you have 27 ways to bill in the DSM, that's 27 ways to bill. If you have 300, that's 300 ways to bill. So you can pretty much find anyone walking on the street that could fit into a DSM somehow.
When you build insurance companies, you can't say the word. You've got to say a number. And they have numbers for the most ridiculous things. You know, like arguing with your mother or peeing in the bed.
Adolescent rebellion disorder is an official psychiatric diagnosis. Arithmetic learning disorder is an official psychiatric diagnosis. General anxiety disorder is a recent diagnosis.
The psychiatric industry takes advantage of that. They say, wow, we can get these things categorized and make it look scientific, so let's label everything. Now we have a label for it. We put a coding. If you've ever seen a medical insurance form, everything has a code.
In DSM, it just looks like sort of some magical numbers. Of course, what we're talking about is reimbursement for mental health treatment as an illness.
The more types of codings, the more types of illnesses you can come up with, the more claims can be paid, and the more reasons for treatment, and the more reasons for revenue for the psychiatric establishment, for the hospitals, and of course, the pharmaceutical companies.
Incredibly enough, while presenting the DSM to the world as scientific fact, psychiatrists freely admit its utter lack of science.
We have no diagnostic reliable markers for almost any illness there is in the DSM.
What we're testing for in psychiatry, it's hard to say because there's nothing specifically.
But as far as a test that's clinically useful, basically we're not there yet.
We don't have any laboratory tests that we can use to determine whether somebody does or doesn't have a mental illness.
There are no good biological tests for detecting mental illness.
There is no test, there's no biopsy you can do.
There is no chemical test right now.
There are no specific tests to confirm the diagnosis or show the improvement, like any blood tests or any x-rays or anything like that.
Oh, in my practice, I don't do any tests. I just speak with people and listen to them, and then I make a decision in what kind of illness.
These diagnoses vary as widely as the psychiatrists who make them. In this hidden camera footage, a person visited several different psychiatrists, complaining of the same symptoms.
I'm extremely unorganized, and I didn't used to be. It's caused problems in the family. It's caused problems getting, I'm self-employed.
So you've got ADD, ADHD, and you're depressed, and your depression is bipolar depressed.
You have a brain chemistry disorder that's probably genetic. You have a lot of the symptoms of depression.
So it seems like it is a mixed picture. What that means is like we got some depressive symptoms and some, high symptoms.
If you're bipolar, I'll need to give you a mood stabilizer. We don't know how to fix.
Considered low-grade bipolar.
You are more of the ADD than ADHD.
And as far as medications for depression, because I would recommend that you start a medication, which are Prozac, Zoloft, Paxil, Celexa.
Usually Propylene XR is pretty good.
They'll give you some Lexapro in the morning and some trazodone at night.
Lamictal is a better medication for that. It works on your depression also.
But the treatment for any bipolar cycling is the same. Lithium.
Bramaron is another one.
Trazodone.
Segradol.
Depakote.
Wellbutrin.
Lexapro.
Lamictal.
Equatroid.
Depakote.
Lithium.
Ambien.
You may need an antidepressant also with your Lamictal.
We don't know if I give you a medication if it is going to work or not.
To a certain degree, it's trial and error.
You never know if it's the right drug.
How many people have I cured? Well, there are no real cures right now in psychiatry.
I have cured none of my patients.
We're always challenged by our lack of knowledge.
I mean, in fact, we don't know what the causes of mental illness are.
Most mental illnesses, we do not know the cause.
Of course, it would be nice to know exact reasons of disorders, but maybe in the future.
I'm the Director of Research at the American Psychiatric Association. We don't know the etiology of really any of the mental disorders at the present time.
DSM-5, it's grown to 10 times its original size, and it labels everybody. I could find 5 diagnoses that would fit you or anybody else in there.
Compare this to the research methods of pathology, a real science that discovers real diseases using a wide variety of precise diagnostic tests.
We do millions of laboratory tests as well as the structural examination and the microscopic examination. It's a whole series of applied scientific procedures. In the case of psychiatry, there isn't any laboratory tool that can precisely identify a psychiatric disease and allow it to be classified.
It's not as if there's some study of tissue or some study of the body or some study of matter. These are all categories which are made up. They're simply made up. They don't exist in nature. They're decided upon by psychiatrists and voted on.
Psychiatrists are not the only ones who benefit from the DSM. Wherever you find a psychiatric diagnosis, you'll find a psychiatric drug.
The pharmaceutical corporations now contribute enormous sums of money for the education of psychiatric residents and for the support of research by their professors, so that psychiatry today has become in America, has become very largely learning which drug to use with which disease or disorder.
This to me is completely unethical, untenable, unacceptable for this to occur. The web of money is all over the place. It has compromised psychiatry, and now it's compromising psychology. And worst of all, it's compromising the patients.
In 2006, a study revealed that 56% of all psychiatrists deciding what disorders to list in their diagnostic manual had financial ties to drug companies. Today, we see the consequences, a barrage of drugs, each one targeted at an invented disorder that is backed by an arbitrary diagnosis found in the DSM.
The fact that it is couched in the language of science without necessarily having any of the scientific data or underpinnings to justify it is as threatening as anything we've seen to date.
And psychiatry's latest and most expensive ploy to fool the public by imitating legitimate medicine? Brain scans.
We can scan all the brains we want to. The fact that we see changes in different people's brains, changes in functioning, doesn't mean that we've discovered anything that has its origin in the brain. It just means that we're seeing changes but it doesn't mean that there's something wrong with the brain.
They have no reliable measures about precise blood flow patterns for any of the psychiatric disorders using any of the scans.
It's marketing. This is marketing. This is not science. This is incredibly effective marketing. It has nothing to do with science.
Psychiatrists and psychologists use the DSM to label 450 million people worldwide as mentally ill, a total equal to the populations of France, Italy, Germany, Canada, the United Kingdom, and Russia combined. While sales of the psychiatric drugs they push have topped $84 billion annually, funding from world governments for these patients gross psychiatry over $250 billion a year. And much of this money comes from the diagnosis and drugging of our most trusting and vulnerable.
Have you been diagnosed with depression and struggle with sadness?
Maybe you're scared of being criticized.
Loss of interest, aches and pain.
Always thinking something terrible.
Ask your doctor about Effexor XR.
Ask
your doctor about Cymbalta.
Talk to your doctor about Zoloft.
So talk to your healthcare professional.
Get with your doctor today.
Your doctor. Tell your doctor.
Contact your doctor immediately.
Talk with your doctor.
Over 40 years ago, leading psychiatrists met in Puerto Rico to map out their vision of the future.
We see a developing potential for nearly a total control of human emotional status, mental functioning, and will to act.
Their plan? To create by the year 2000 a range of psychiatric drugs regulating every aspect of human behavior.
Yeah, I was diagnosed with depression and put on Paxil.
ADD, and I was prescribed Ritalin.
Bipolar disorder, and I take lithium.
Depression, Effexor, Lexapro.
PTSD, Zoloft.
I was on Paxil.
When they placed me on Zoloft.
They gave me Adderall.
I was prescribed Siptamil,
Tegretol,
Lexapro,
Risperdal,
Stelazine,
Adderall,
Concerta,
Orazine,
Vyvanse,
Lorazepam,
Effexor,
Clonazepam,
Ritalin,
dexamphetamine,
Paxil, Cylert,
Prozac,
Adderall,
Elavil,
Depakote, Wellbutrin, Seroquel, etc., etc.
100 million people worldwide are on psychiatric drugs. How did this happen? Psychiatrists convinced them they were sick.
They want you to think you're diseased from birth, and that all those experiences of life, childhood and adolescence and teenage years and adulthood and being a senior citizen, that these are all various stages of disease.
Because let's face it, we've all been depressed at one time. We've all been anxious at one time. These are normal emotions that we feel.
Every emotional and spiritual problem is reduced to a label.
And of course, all of those diseases require pharmaceutical treatments. This is big, big business.
While generating a healthy income, claiming to be medical professionals, psychiatrists will freely confess that their profession is devoid of science.
We don't really have any specific blood tests or other tests that are definitive for any mental illness whatsoever.
It would be neat if it would become much more scientific.
Well, if you go to my office and you tell me that you're depressed, there's nothing, and no blood sample or whatever, no tests.
There are not current available tests to verify your diagnosis.
I don't use any tests.
You do not have a test to say, well, this is this disorder and this is the best medication for this disorder.
For many years we thought we had the tests nailed down, but it turned out that they weren't of any value.
If you don't know what's causing the symptoms, then to give somebody something to alleviate the symptoms is close to impossible.
By the time a drug's approved and it hits the general population, we don't know even 50% of the side effects that are involved with that drug.
And these pills cause heart attacks and liver problems and immune system problems and lots of other medical problems. So you're playing with fire.
Every day, psychotropic drugs cause serious adverse reactions. And while psychiatrists and drug companies fully understand the dangers of the drugs they sell, their unsuspecting customers are left to suffer the consequences.
everything became worse. Each mood swing was worse.
He would have chronic headaches, chronic, nausea, not feeling good.
She was very agitated, very, very jumpy.
She was having horrible hallucinations.
Her personality was disintegrating.
Once he started on that drug, the cloud just stayed over him and stayed over him and stayed over him. It got darker and darker.
He thought there wasn't anything worth living to kill himself. That was not Matthew. That was the drugs.
At least I would like to have said, I love you. I didn't get a chance to do that.
In addition to crippling scores of people daily, every month, psychiatric drugs kill an estimated 3,000. But the human devastation would never have gotten this high if psychiatrists hadn't worked hand in hand with drug companies to promote their drugs to doctors throughout the world. Today, 70% of all psychiatric drugs are prescribed by general physicians. And how is this accomplished? Marketing.
It's about creating a good story that uses science that convinces a physician to think about writing a prescription.
This is not science. This is incredibly effective marketing. It has nothing to do with science.
They use what I call statistical contortionism. Basically just skew the numbers, make everything look fantastic. You hide the bad numbers.
They're learning every trick in the book. They're evolving into efficient marketing machines, and it's working.
There's definitely an unholy alliance between psychiatry and pharmaceutical sales. That's a marriage made in heaven.
They're like conjoined twins. They're joined at the wallet.
And with 374 mental disorders filling psychiatry's diagnostic manual and more on the way, business is booming. Pharmaceutical companies have expanded their roster of psychotropic drugs from 44 in 1966 to 174 today. The top 5 psychotropic drugs combined gross more money than the gross national product of each of over half the countries on Earth. Altogether, the psychiatric industry rakes in $1/3 of $1 trillion a year. How could this have happened? It's a tale of deception that may be difficult to believe, but fatal to ignore. There is no denying that psychological and emotional problems, even severe mental distress, can affect most anyone. But does this mean we are all insane? What causes psychological distress? Early psychiatrists thought it was an imbalance of the humors that could only be cured by bleeding patients with knives or leeches. Other psychiatrists believed mental problems came from organs like the tonsils, the stomach, and the spleen, and cut them out. Later were attempts to alter brain function, but these efforts also failed. Today, psychiatrists tell us that the way to fix unwanted behavior is by balancing brain chemistry with a pill. Did they get it right this time?
They say you have a chemical imbalance of serotonin and dopamine, but there's never been a study to ever prove that, ever. It's just been indoctrinated into the culture and television advertising to the point where people now believe it as fact.
Despite this lack of evidence, psychiatrists will tell you that psychotropic drugs are just like mainstream medical drugs. Can this be true? The answer is that unlike a drug such as insulin that corrects a measurable and proven imbalance in the body, psychotropic medications have no visible or measurable physical abnormality to correct. Here is evidence of a bacterial infection. Here is the psychiatric disorder, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Here is a broken arm. Here is major depressive disorder. This is a brain tumor. And this is bipolar disorder. Which raises the question, how can you medicate something that is not physically there? The answer is, you can't. And furthermore, Because psychotropic drugs are specifically designed to get past the body's natural defenses and into the brain, they can upset the very delicate processes the brain needs to ensure the body runs smoothly.
Every time you throw something into the system that's foreign to the system, you're creating imbalances elsewhere within the system.
The body changes as a result of taking the medication, so when you stop taking the medication, the body's got to change back to the way it was before, if it can, because it can't always. And in doing so, it disrupts the whole system.
This is what creates the sometimes serious side effects.
Paxil was the drug that gave me insomnia. I would cry very easily on it, and I completely lost my appetite within the first 2 days of taking it.
It didn't help me study, it didn't help me do anything. I didn't even want to do work because I was so sick.
The psych meds didn't help me at all. They made matters, I'd say probably like 10 times worse for me, maybe even 20.
Only now I was further impaired by the medications, and I started having car accidents.
They put me on Zoloft, and it made me want to kill myself.
And I realized that those drugs were just destroying me. Even when I was on them, I realized that they were destroying me.
In spite of the crippling effects of their drugs, psychiatrists and drug companies have used them to create a huge and lucrative market worth billions. And they've done this by naming more and more of life's problems as medical disorders, requiring psychiatric treatment. For example, shyness becomes social anxiety disorder. Loss of a loved one, major depressive disorder. Homesickness, separation anxiety. Suspicion, paranoid personality disorder. Having ups and downs, bipolar disorder. Distractibility, ADHD. This is why it is almost impossible for anyone to see a psychiatrist today and not be diagnosed with a mental illness. And a diagnosis of mental illness means psychotropic drugs.
When a patient goes into a psychiatrist's office and asks for help, probably 98, 99, maybe even 99.9% of people are going to receive a medication.
And these medications have been estimated to cause over 700,000 serious adverse reactions a year and 42,000 deaths. Meanwhile, the psychiatric industry rakes in $1/3 trillion a year. The issue isn't whether or not people's emotional problems are real. They are. What we really should be asking is, how did psychiatrists convince people that these problems were signs of mental illness? How did they use these illnesses to create a demand by doctors and the public for psychotropic drugs? And how did these drugs, with no known curative powers and a long list of side effects, become the standard treatment for every problem in life?
Matthew was a very loved child. He was an 18-year-old American boy like everybody else in this country.
Normal boy. When he was born, just the cutest little baby with big brown eyes.
He was a handsome little boy, and he was very happy all the time.
He was such a free spirit. He was so happy all the time, and he had a smile to die for.
I remember Matt's smile, boy, I'll tell you something.
He was a charmer. Yeah, those eyes of his could probably get him in a lot of trouble.
He's always involved, you know, he likes being involved in sports.
We used to play basketball, paintball, and
he was always a scrapper, though. That's one thing I liked about him. If you picked on him, he'd pick on your back.
someone to always talk to, you know, personal relationships, someone you can depend on.
He was a great person, lots of fun.
I miss him. I miss him every day of my life.
He was having trouble sleeping, and he was having bad dreams and waking up and starting to have like panic attacks. That's when I said to him, you know, Matt, maybe it would be helpful if you talked to somebody outside of the family, you know, like, would you want to do that? So we go in there, and after no more than 15 minutes, she gives us samples of Lexapro. At that point, he stopped wanting to talk. He seemed to be withdrawing more. This was weird behavior for him. Well, a lot was happening at this time also, and he was graduating from high school. Of course, the big plan, the kids always, they go to Senior Beach Week. He didn't want to go. He wanted to go visit his brother. And off he went. The day that he was supposed to be coming home, it was around 1 o'clock. I hadn't heard from him yet. He was supposed to call me when he finally left. Later on, I guess it was after I got off work, I called, and he didn't answer. But a little while later, he called me back, and he said, he might have said he was almost to North Carolina. It was about 11:30, and I called. He said, I'm fine, I just passed Rowan up. I woke up at around 2:30, kind of jumped up at the clock, and realized he should have been home an hour ago. So I called the cell phone. It went straight to voicemail. I kept calling and calling. I'm like, Matthew, answer the friggin' phone. I was like so upset. Fell asleep, woke up again. It was about 6 o'clock in the morning. He still wasn't home. I didn't know what to do. I started getting ready for work. Went to work. I could hardly function. I went, told my boss I have to go home. Get in the door, the phone's ringing. And there's this man on the other end, and he said, I'm looking for the family of Matthew Stubing. I said, this is his mother. Who's this? And he said, I'm calling about the jumping. That was the beginning of my story. As a mother, I needed to make sense of what happened to my child. The first answer came when my husband found a magazine article that linked psychiatric drugs to suicide. I was horrified. It answered some questions, but made me think of so many more. I had to find out for myself. I had to do something. This is for you, Matthew. The first thing I discovered was there were a lot of other mothers who had been through similar experiences and were speaking out. Thank you all very much for being here today. When I took Matthew to the doctor, he was diagnosed with a clinical depression, and they said it was because of a chemical imbalance.
They're not telling you that it's entirely psychologically based and subjective. They're just saying, oh, well, based on these symptoms, you have a chemical imbalance.
Mm-hmm. And with a chemical imbalance, it's like, where did they come up with that? What chemicals?
Where are the tests, you know? If somebody tells you that your child has ADHD, ask them to draw their blood and show you the chemical imbalance causing this. And they can't do it. It's completely arbitrary and subjective, and it is their opinion.
And you want to do what is right for your child, so you bow to the pressure because you think that they know. You know your child better than anybody. Tune them out. You do what your heart tells you. You don't listen to them.
These women were strong, knowledgeable, and determined to get the word out. Were there professionals who also knew the truth about psychiatric drugs? There were a lot more than I thought. One of them was Dr. Gary Coles, a medical doctor and an authority on the dangers of psychiatric drugs.
Drugs just alter the brain. You know, they never cure anything, and then they make you permanent patients, which is great for business and bad for patients. And completed suicide is just one of the thousands of adverse effects that the industry refuses to acknowledge.
Dr. Coles was right. After doing my own research, I found thousands of side effects for every psychiatric drug, including Lexapro, the one Matthew was taking. But instead of warning us, the authorities are playing down the side effects, as I found out from Dr. Doris Rapp.
Drugs such as that one can cause serious weight gain. It can cause depression. It can cause dizziness. And there are many isolated reports of almost any area of the body being affected by those. These are the ones that cause the obesity, the diabetes, the depression, the suicidal thoughts, the heart disease.
This problem of the drugging of children was far worse than I had ever imagined. 20 million kids worldwide are on some type of psychiatric drug. 20 million potential Matthews. And according to a children's social worker, Sonia Mohammed, There's no group of children harder hit with these drugs than children in foster care.
In Los Angeles County alone, we have probably about 50,000 kids in the system.
What percentage of those do you think are on drugs?
I would be willing to say from experience somewhere between 50% and 75%.
The more experts I talked to and the more questions I asked, the more obvious it became. Our children are being drugged at a rate that is truly scary.
I personally have not seen any curtailing of prescribing drugs. I see it as still getting worse and worse.
They're preying on the most vulnerable. They're preying on the people who they should be protecting the most and helping the most.
Especially children, their personalities are to be gregarious and fun, and to take that away from them, I think, is a crime.
I kept thinking back to my children and what the other mothers had said about theirs. Their smiles, their imagination and creativity, and their boundless energy.
My name is Tyler Milford, and I am 11. My age is 7 years old. Actually, just make that 7.5. I'm 8 years old, and I want to be a chef at a 5-star restaurant. I'm going to be an orthopedic surgeon. When I grow up, I want to be a geologist.
I would like to become a professional basketball player.
Professional clothes designer. I want to be a musician, a actress, director, a teacher, dancer, and a singer. I'd go for speed skating if I wanted to. I'm really good. I just want to keep practicing and practicing until I know I'm perfect at it and then do something big.
Yes, I plan to get an Oscar.
I was hoping that it would be like the funnest thing that I would do in my life.
Losing a child is the worst thing that could ever happen to a parent. Children need protection. They need guidance and they need love. They don't need psychiatric drugs. And I'm going to tell that to as many people as I can.
Life can be a real adventure. Hot, fast,
slow or sad.
Maybe sometimes even filled with ups and downs.
But according to Psychiatry's Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, any part of life can be labeled a mental illness.
That sounds a little crazy.
It is. It's 943 pages long and covers everything from depression and anxiety to stuttering, cigarette addiction, fear of spiders.
I heard that psychiatrists say that at some time in our lives, almost half of us will suffer from a mental disorder.
Yeah, but according to experts, the supposed science in the DSM is non-existent.
The DSM is a sham. It's been described as a house of cards. Why? Because the diagnoses are theoretical.
Every few years, a group of psychiatrists and psychologists sit around in a room and vote on new diagnoses.
This is fundamentally a book of inventions.
You know, I don't think the public is being told any of this.
You're right. The public has been led to believe that psychiatry is a science.
No kidding.
Listen to this.
The diseases are voted on? What do you mean?
Did you say, are they voted into existence?
Are voted?
As in created.
Oh, man.
It's crazy that you would vote.
Mental disorders should be based on scientific research.
I have been led to believe that it's all based on medicine and science.
So I'm kind of shocked to find that out.
That's wild.
Yeah. Even the psychiatrist in charge of the DSM's current edition is admitting to psychiatry's lack of science.
There is no definition of a mental disorder. It's bullshit. I mean, you just can't define it.
Now, come on. 374 names in this book for something they can't even define?
Right. And check out what the top U.S. government psychiatrist says.
I don't do with DSM. I'm not involved. And that maybe tells you more than anything. NIMH is not involved with DSM.
There goes that myth.
Hold on. It gets worse.
You can diagnose everybody on the planet, probably with the way that this manual is shaping up.
It seems to me you can define any human behavior, give it a name, and that's what the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual tries to do.
The consequence of that is that the whole world is being made crazy.
Wow, this isn't science, this is just heavy-duty marketing.
But it's made to sound like science. And when they don't know, they even have a diagnosis for that.
This is number 301.9.
312.9.
292.9.
Bipolar disorder, not otherwise specified.
Gender identity disorder, not otherwise specified.
Disorder of infancy, childhood, or adolescence, not otherwise specified.
Not otherwise specified. What the hell does that say? They don't know.
It's kind of like a catch-all.
It's the garbage can for the leftovers.
There's even a box for people that don't fit in the other boxes.
To me, it's insane.
This is like rubbish to me.
This is scary to me.
This is hackery, quackery, dockery.
Sounds like a pretty worthless manual.
Worthless? Not to psychiatrists. Would you believe the American Psychiatric Association rakes in $6.5 million a year just by selling the DSM?
I don't get it. What makes this book so valuable?
If they didn't have the DSM, psychiatrists would have nothing to bill for.
Ah, it's all about money.
Well, the whole system is now a runaway train, but the DSM is the locomotive.
How many labels can we put out there? How many people can we herd into these labels and feed them a drug so we can get richer?
Prescribe away, lifetime patient. That's what the DSM is for.
In spite of its incredibly shaky foundation, psychiatry's diagnostic and statistical manual has literally infiltrated our schools, our governments, even our court systems.
What about the media and the military?
Those too.
Basically our entire society.
That's right. The DSM drives a $330 billion psychiatric industry. But if you look at it closely,
it's more than just a house of cards.
It's psychiatry's deadliest scam.
The very picture of a modern society. Seemingly secure. Seemingly safe. Seemingly happy. But life isn't always as it appears. Innocent people forcibly incarcerated. Lives ruined by psychiatric medication. And worst yet, children being brutalized. Psychiatry's history of atrocities can be found everywhere. But nowhere can we see them more clearly than in psychiatry's very birthplace, Germany. Psychiatry's leap into the mainstream occurred in 1879 in Leipzig with Wilhelm Wundt.
Wundt ist eine sehr bedeutende Person innerhalb der Psychologie und diese Bedeutung ist vor allem auf die Gründung des ersten psychologischen Instituts weltweit zurückzuführen.
Wundt theorized that man was an animal without a soul, a stimulus-response mechanism whose behavior must be molded in order to fit into society. But a far more insidious social control technique would be introduced by Wundt's contemporary Francis Galton. Galton created a pseudoscience in 1863 that would have a profound and lasting effect on all future psychiatric belief: eugenics. Eugenics was the theory that human beings could be selectively bred to encourage desirable traits and weed out the undesirable. This pseudoscience rapidly swept across Germany. In 1905, psychiatrist Ernst Rudin, along with his brother-in-law, eugenicist Alfred Ploetz, started up the first organization promoting what Ploetz termed racial hygiene. In the 1924 book Mein Kampf, Hitler himself hailed the psychiatric theory of eugenics as the science that would rebuild his nation. In Hitler, Rudin had finally found the vehicle he'd been looking for.
Durch das politische Werk Adolf Hitlers wurde endlich unser mehr als 30-jähriger Traum zur Wirklichkeit, Rassenhygiene in die Tat umsetzen zu können.
6 months after taking power, the Nazi Party turned to Rudin to lead the drafting of the 1933 Law for the Prevention of Genetically Diseased Offspring, which allowed the compulsory sterilization of any citizen. In the next 12 years, a total of 400,000 German citizens would be sterilized. But the psychiatrists then took the movement a giant step further, when the sterilization turned to murder. And the first to be killed were children. A clandestine government program set up a network of 31 psychiatric killing centers that would destroy its young, innocent victims with injections of morphine and gassing with cyanide and chemical warfare agents. But German psychiatrists were not done yet. At their urging, Hitler would issue a secret decree allowing euthanasia, or mercy killings, of feeble-minded people of all ages. 6 psychiatric institutions were converted into official killing centers where victims would be taken from mental hospitals all over Germany.
Grauen Bussen, dem bildhaften Symbol für das Töten, wurden die Patienten und Patientinnen aus den Heil- und Pflegeanstalten abgeholt und in 6 psychiatrische Anstalten gebracht, in denen Gaskammern eingerichtet worden waren. Heilanstalten wurden zu Vernichtungsanstalten. Aus Heilung wurde Vernichtung und Psychiater überwachten den Abtransport und die Ermordung der ihnen anvertrauten Patienten.
In just 2 years, psychiatrists would murder 70,273 of those entrusted to their care. In fact, when it was decided to move the killing into the concentration camps, the Nazis called upon top German psychiatrists.
Viele Personen, die später auch bei der Vernichtung der europäischen Juden im Generalgouvernement tätig waren, bereits hier in Hartheim in der Euthanasieanstalt tätig waren. Das heißt, hier gibt es eine ganz direkte Verbindung sozusagen zwischen dem Euthanasieprogramm und dem Holocaust.
Meines Erachtens kann man nicht sagen, es gibt nur einzelne schwarze Schafe innerhalb der Psychiatrie, die den Nationalsozialisten zugearbeitet haben, sondern es ist ein Problem des gesamten Berufsstandes.
All told, between 11 and 17 million people were murdered during the Holocaust, all judged eugenically inferior and marked for death. At the war crimes trials in Nuremberg that followed, experts all agreed that the mass murder programs would never have happened if psychiatry hadn't conceived, organized, and run them. Yet very few psychiatrists were ever brought to trial, much less convicted of anything. In the years that followed, mountains of damning evidence would finally force their leadership to apologize.
Ich habe spät genug bei allen Opfern und Angehörigen um Entschuldigung zu bitten für das erlittene Unrecht und das Leid, das ihnen von deutschen Verbänden und ihren Psychiatern zugefügt wurde.
Today, psychiatry's influence can be felt everywhere. But has psychiatry learned from its past? Or do today's psychiatrists still inflict damaging treatments on their helpless victims?
Sicherlich hat die Nachkriegspsychiatrie in Deutschland erhebliche Einflüsse, schreckliche Einflüsse aus der Nazi-Psychiatrie.
Ich sehe auch eine Parallele zwischen der heutigen Psychiatrie und der Nazizeit.
Nowhere is this truer than in today's psychiatric hospitals, where those with behavior considered undesirable are not healed but repressed. Take, for example, Jana, a then perfectly normal 13-year-old with typical teenage problems.
Also die Jana, die hatte verschiedene Ängste, mit Nasenbluten, Pubertät fing das an. Und das Jugendamt hat mich dann total unter Druck gesetzt, das Kind in eine Psychiatrie zu bringen.
Da kam dann auf einmal der Herr zu mir und er hat gesagt, komm mal mit, Jana, ich zeig dir was. Ja, und dann bin ich mit dem gegangen, da sind wir solche komischen Treppen hochgegangen. Ja, und dann bin ich halt mit reingegangen, hat er die Tür hinter mir wieder zugeschlossen. Da habe ich dann erst gecheckt, dass ich halt in so einer Psychiatrie jetzt gelandet bin. Da habe ich halt nur noch gemerkt, wie mich der hat mich dann auch halt gepackt und dann hinten noch 2 Betreuer. Die haben mich dann zu dritt auf den Boden geschmissen, nur weil ich so Angst hatte und so. Ja, und meine Arme waren ganz verdreht auf dem Rücken. Die haben mich auch so ein Stück weit über den Boden geschliffen. Und ich hatte überall halt hier so Wunden, überall. Und ja.
Tag später muss man dann nochmal kommen. Da wurde mir dann mitgeteilt, dass ich ein schwer krankes Kind hätte. Das sagte also die Diplompsychologin, dass das Kind eine paranoide Schizophrenie hätte. Ne?
Also die Nebenwirkungen von den Psychopharmaka, die haben sich ganz furchtbar angefühlt. Also ich hatte Bauchkrämpfe, meine Hände waren verkrampft, ich konnte keinen Stift mehr in der Hand halten. Der Stift ist mir rausgefallen aus der Hand und ja, ich weiß, ich konnte nicht mehr schlucken, gar nichts mehr und meine Augen haben gerollt, mir war schlecht und ich hatte schreckliche Kopfschmerzen, mein Nacken, der war total versteift und
Es ging ihr ganz schlecht. Sie hat mir dann versucht, über ihre Nebenwirkungen, die sie hatte von den Präparaten, was mitzuteilen. Das durfte sie aber nicht, weil direkt ein Betreuer neben uns, fest neben uns, praktisch schon auf uns gesessen hat und hat mitverfolgt, was wir dann so sagen wollten. Das durften wir nicht, sonst wäre sofort der Besuch abgebrochen worden.
Also Selbstmordgedanken hatte ich vor Psychopharmaka noch nie. Aber als ich diese Psychopharmaka bekommen habe, da habe ich mir halt die ganzen Arme hier aufgeritzt, alles aufgeritzt. Aber jetzt weiß ich gar nicht mehr, wieso ich das getan habe. Also die Tabletten haben total eine Gehirnwäsche verursacht. Also das war ganz schrecklich. Für mich hat die Psychiatrie überhaupt keinen Wert. Das ist einfach alles ganz furchtbar da. Ganz schrecklich. Würde ich keinem weiterempfehlen. Niemand soll in eine Psychiatrie kommen. Niemand.
Mere weeks after this interview, Jana was taken away from her home and denied access to her family. Instead of solving mental distress, psychiatry has historically created devastation. And in a world ever deteriorating under increasing psychiatric influence, we are witnessing an alarming resurgence of psychiatry's Nazi-era abuses.
Was wir seit längeren Jahren jetzt immer mehr vermehrt festgestellt haben, ist, dass eine gewisse Zwangssterilisation an Behinderten vorzogen wird. Die jüngsten Opfer, die mir bekannt sind, sind 14, 15 Jahre alt.
This isn't just happening in Germany. In Russia, it was recently discovered that psychiatrists had been forcibly sterilizing women in psychiatric hospitals against their will. In Western Australia, a law was proposed allowing the sterilization of children over the age of 11 without the permission of their parents. And from the Netherlands comes a 550% increase in the euthanasia of its citizens over the year before. As we now know, the Nazi era was not where psychiatric human rights abuses began, and certainly not where they end. In Germany alone, 36,000 children are ripped from their homes every year. Over 200,000 people are committed to a mental institution against their will. And 4 million German citizens are drugged with psychiatric medication. Without any science to back it up, psychiatry is today a $330 billion a year industry without a single cure. This is an industry that doesn't just specialize in destroying people's lives, it kills men's souls. We need to declare an end to psychiatry's age of fear.
They protect us. They defend us. They help us in times of need. But they're being destroyed from within.
Last year saw more Army suicides than any year on record.
Day
Our son was just one of thousands of veterans that this country has lost to suicide.
after day
Only to die here at home in their sleep.
after day.
He then used a pistol to take his own life.
There is a hidden enemy at work.
It's got to stop.
And it's hiding in plain sight. The most dangerous enemy is the one you never suspect. June 18th, 1940. Psychiatrist and Brigadier General J.R. Reese addressed the annual meeting of the National Council for Mental Hygiene with a strategic plan for psychiatry.
We must aim to make it permeate every educational activity in our national life. Public life, politics, and industry should all of them be within our sphere of influence.
But to reach their objectives, psychiatrists needed the perfect proving ground. One with an unlimited budget that could keep on growing.
It's all about money. Billions of dollars.
It's our tax money.
A proving ground with an endless supply of human resources.
More people than any other organization in America.
These troops are the guinea pigs.
They're being experimented on.
A proving ground where every order is obeyed, no questions asked.
You have to obey those orders.
You don't have an option. I'm legally obligated.
And a proving ground where any collateral damage would be labeled classified.
This story has been censored every step of the way.
Brigadier General Reese knew where to look.
The Army and the other fighting services form rather unique experimental groups, since they are complete communities. And it is possible to arrange experiments in a way that would be very difficult in civilian life.
It was a shrewd tactic, especially when sold under the guise of help.
And now the soldier was sick, and unless we do something for him, he may remain sick for an indefinite period of time. Gentlemen, you are not requested to treat these patients. You are directed to do so.
Psychiatrists used the Second World War as an opportunity to try some very risky treatments on soldiers who had very little say in the matter. They were electroshocking some, putting others into a deep coma, and filling yet more with powerful, mind-altering drugs. As they infiltrated further and further, they became involved in military recruitment, training, discipline, morale. They were even making opinions about the selection of officers.
Poole is an odd sort of man. In civilian life, he was very badly adjusted. In the personal sense, that is, he just couldn't mix, couldn't make friends.
By the middle of World War II, militaries around the world were buying into psychiatrists' claims that they were the mental health experts. And because of that, psychiatrists were free to try out drugs on a lot more soldiers.
The drugs of choice are the barbiturates. You will note that in combat exhaustion, massive doses of these drugs are needed in therapy.
From the 50s through the 70s, psychiatrists in countries like Britain, the United States, and the USSR continued to use their militaries as proving grounds for an arsenal of new experimental treatments such as LSD.
Unknown to the troops, the drug was added to the water on the second day. At 11:40, the first effects of the drug make their appearance. The men no longer take cover, they relax and begin to giggle. 70 minutes after the administration of the drug, with one man climbing a tree, the troop commander gives up, saying, "I cannot do anything about this. I cannot control the men and I can take no action myself. I am wiped out as an attacking force."
Up through time, soldiers continue to be given psychiatric drugs for uses never studied or approved. It's been one huge experiment.
We've gotten reports that the Gulf War II pilots do take amphetamines, they do take dexedrine, and that at the nighttime they're given Ambien to bring them down so they can sleep. So they're continuously on this up and down kind of scenario.
Certainly in the Iraq, Afghanistan wars,
psychiatry has played a huge role. Huge.
The drugging of the military is off the charts, especially in the United States. From 2005 to 2011, the U.S. Department of Defense increased its prescriptions of psychiatric drugs by nearly 7 times. That's over 30 times faster than civilians.
There was friends of mine that I saw had 2, 3, 4 pills that they had to take daily.
You find soldiers that are on dozens of medications. I've heard as high as 14.
I know of some troops, personally, who were given up to 20 different drugs.
It's kind of depressing if you look at the number of medications that I've been on. It's very thick. It makes up a large portion of my medical file with the Veterans Administration.
Some American soldiers are routinely given up to 180 days worth of psychiatric drugs when they go to the front. No supervision, no restrictions, just take them when they want.
All psychiatric meds are mind-altering drugs. People don't put that together, but they're mind-altering and they have side effects, disastrous side effects.
Psychiatrists know this, but still claim they are therapeutic. Here's the reality.
Ever since I was a little kid, I always loved the military. I loved the Army, and I think I always knew that I wanted to, join. And I just said, I wanted to go and experience it, and just to serve my country. And then I went to the recruiter station. I said, I want to jump out of airplanes and ride motorcycles. And right then they said, we got a job for you, But, I did it and it was good. It was right after combat. So, I started getting these dreams and flashbacks and all that stuff. And then, kind of like big anxiety and all that stuff. And I went to my doc and they said, yeah, we got to get you some meds, and they gave me them and, that was it.
In my experience, I didn't see anything helping at all. I felt like it was making everything worse.
You take your meds and you can just start feeling it going down, and then you're just like, bam, and you're a zombie.
It almost seemed like he just didn't care about life anymore. He wasn't himself.
My body was breaking down, and my wife, she's saying, this isn't right. And then I was all drunk, and the meds just taking that and I just said, I'm done. And I took my pistol, put it in my mouth, and she opened up the door. I took him, and I said, I was like, I said, we could do something, and this shit just didn't work, and
I had to literally grab the weapon away from him because it probably would have happened.
So I said, I'm stopping. I'm stopping taking all this. It's killing me. It's gonna kill me. It's gonna kill my wife.
That was the straw that broke the camel's back. It wasn't working and something had to be done. I didn't want to lose my husband. I didn't want him to kill himself, and I didn't want to be killed as well in the process.
I knew I wasn't me, it was the drug that was doing it, and I knew I had to change or I'd be dead, and that's why I changed it.
Despite all this, psychiatrists continue to hand out psychiatric drugs in volume. Drugs well known to increase violence and suicidal thinking.
And last year, within the DoD, there were 349 suicides among military personnel. That's almost one a day, literally one a day.
That's more suicides than were killed in combat. And as bad as it is in active duty, veterans have it far worse. They're killing themselves at a rate of 22 a day, one every 65 minutes. Immediate action is needed, not just in the United States, but around the world.
I deal a lot with a lot of our soldiers within our NATO brothers and sisters. Canada, New Zealand, Australia, UK, Germany, France, Belgium, and even soldiers down in Italy and even in Spain. Each and every one of them have complained about the issues dealing with psychotropic drugs with them.
I was stationed in Germany for a while. I was in Kosovo for a while. And they had talked about that, yeah, when they see the psychiatrist, they do give them psychotropic drugs.
A lot of our veterans have told us that when they went for help whilst they were still serving, they were then prescribed medication. It didn't help.
Quand on envoie un patient chez un psychiatre, il ressort directement avec des molécules chimiques.
І справді, психіатри давали військовослужбовцям небезпечні наркотики, при цьому знаючи, що військовослужбовці мають в руках небезпечну зброю.
Och någonstans så finns det ju någon drivande orsak till att vi skriver ut mer och mer piller. Men vi får ju inte förväntade resultatet.
Psychiatry is now an accepted part of militaries internationally. But for the world's soldiers, it is nothing but trouble. More British soldiers and veterans committed suicide in 2012 than were killed in battle. Same thing for the relatively small Australian military over the past decade. 20% of the deaths of German troops abroad are from suicide. And the Russian military has a suicide rate 65% higher than the rest of the entire country.
So, what is the solution? Get rid of psychiatry and mental health. Don't leave them in charge.
Mental health will not improve until psychiatrists are no longer in charge of it.
I truly believe that they are destroying our military.
Statistically, you are less likely to be shot by an enemy than to be killed by a pharmaceutical drug. That's the truth about psychiatry.
And yet, psychiatry's reach today goes well beyond the military. It is just as J.R. Reese planned. Psychiatric treatment tested out and advanced within the military, spilling out into every nook and cranny of civilian life. Psychiatry is currently an international $330 billion a year industry. It promised help. It delivers pain, damage, and death. The hidden enemy has now been revealed. What happens next is up to all of us. You've got the facts. Fight back.